MALDEF is proud to honor this evening civil rights activist Karen Narasaki, the chairman of the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, Luis Ubiñas, and President Emeritus, National Education Association, Lily Eskelsen Garcia.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your Master of Ceremonies for this evening, Raul Reyes.
Buenas noches and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to do a special shout out to all the NEA people in the house, because I come from a family of teachers and educators in a few generations, so I'm super excited to see you all. Anyway, welcome to MALDEF's 2021 Washington, D.C. Awards Gala. I am so honored to be your host this evening. And I don't know about all of you, but I haven't been out a lot in the last few years, so this is a big deal for me, and I can tell from the beautiful people I met already, this seems like a very collegial group. This already feels very familial, so it's a great honor for me to be here. Before we begin tonight's festivities, let me share with you that tonight is the first in-person gala in DC since 2019. So thank you all for not just your ongoing support and partnership, but for being a part of this precedent-setting evening. We welcome you all on behalf of the MALDEF Board of Directors and Thomas Saenz, my legal hero. And we thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. It would not be possible, obviously, with your support. Speaking of support, early on, one corporate leader reached out to MALDEF to offer its generous support as a national gala sponsor. It's actually a huge commitment. And now Verizon is one of 3 national gala sponsors. Another precedent setting. So now let's view a brief Verizon video.
When the revolution come knocking at my door, I ain't fighting just for myself no more. Got my brothers by my side, and on the wings of freedom we ride. When the revolution come knocking at my door.
At Verizon, we are committed to closing America's digital divide. We are investing to bring tech and connectivity to underserved schools across the country, making high-quality connectivity more affordable for low-income families, and expanding access to rural communities so more people have the affordable, high-quality internet they deserve. It's all part of our $3 billion commitment to help those who need it most and close the digital divide. Because we believe no one should be left behind.
Revolution come knocking at my door.
All right, please join me in welcoming Emilio Gonzalez, Verizon Executive Director for Public Policy and Strategic Alliances.
Good evening, everyone. I found out I had to deliver remarks when I got here this evening, so I have no prepared remarks, but I do want to take a minute to say a few words about MALDEF. A few years ago, I joined their board of directors and got to take a closer look at this wonderful organization and what it does. And I got to experience the commitment, the hard work, the dedication that their staff puts in every single day. Whether it's redistricting, or making sure we can go to school, or making sure we can vote, or making sure there's justice in our immigration system. What this small team does, it punches way above its weight. So I am honored that we can support this organization as a national sponsor. It is a privilege to know their staff and their leadership. And I want to say a word about Tom Saenz, their leader, who has been here for this community you see when we meet how far he has to stretch personally to meet the needs of this community. It is not work I could ever do. I don't have that kind of energy, but his passion, his commitment, his intellect, but his humility together is, for me, I can't think of a better representative for our community. So last time I was here and I said a few words, they honored me with a Lifetime Achievement Award that I will never forget. And tonight I'm just honored that I can begin to pay it back little by little. Verizon won't be going anywhere. We will be here for you, thick or thin. And I do want to say congratulations to all the honorees tonight, really well deserved, and I thank you for your attention and time. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilio, and thank you, Verizon. So we have a tremendous program tonight that begins with our amazing honorees, each of whom joins us in uniting around a shared mission of promoting a greater America for all of us, including our large and growing Latino community. But I wanted to begin by sharing some highlights from MALDEF's remarkable history. MALDEF opened its doors in 1968 in San Antonio, Texas. This followed efforts by Latino lawyers and community activists from throughout the Southwest to create a legal organization to promote the civil rights of Latinos living in the United States. Today, MALDEF is known as the Latino legal voice for civil rights in America. For 53 years now, MALDEF has worked in the courts, in the halls of Congress, and state legislatures to create new laws and policies with wide-ranging impact for the Latino community and for our nation as a whole. In the courts, in the schools, boardrooms, council chambers, and right up to the United States Supreme Court, MALDEF has earned its reputation as a champion of Latino civil rights. Now, I just wanted to touch on something. I'd like you all to think about what you've been doing in the last 2 years. I know a lot of us maybe we're at home working very differently, maybe not doing as much or as productively as we would have liked. But I just would like to introduce that theme about the last 2 years, okay? Because in the last 2 years, MALDEF has been busy. In the last 2 years, MALDEF has challenged, on behalf of Latino voters, the Illinois legislature's use of population estimates to redistrict rather than decennial census data. MALDEF successfully challenged that as a violation of the 14th Amendment. MALDEF is now in remedial proceedings to arrive at better maps to reflect the substantial growth of the Latino community in the state of Illinois. More recently, MALDEF has filed suit in Texas for about the 5th or 6th time on behalf of Latino voters and Latino serving organizations to challenge that legislature's unconstitutional and unlawful redistricting. In the last 2 years, MALDEF has also appealed the decision of a federal court in Texas that DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, is unlawful. MALDEF has been busy and continuing to work in testimony, sometimes very difficult and contested testimony. But you have to expect that when you see some of the folks that are sitting on the Judiciary Committee and subcommittees. But MALDEF has continued to work, and that work includes securing the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that actual act, by the way, includes a provision originally put forth by MALDEF to create a new coverage formula to reach and protect the rights of growing communities around the country, like our own Latino community. Just in the last 2 years, MALDEF has launched a new program called Freedom from Open and Obvious Bias and Racism. something so unexpected for the 21st century, much less 2021. But with the regrettable openness and audacity of white supremacists and white nationalist philosophy, that has all required that MALDEF step forward and articulate as a central goal the elimination of that kind of open and obvious bias and racism. Just in the last 2 years, MALDEF has filed numerous class actions on behalf of work-authorized DACA recipients who have been denied employment at some of the largest corporations in the country simply because they obtained work authorization through the DACA initiative. Just in the last 2 years, MALDEF has settled national class action litigation against Motel 6 for its practice of reporting its Latino guests to ICE for immigration enforcement. Yeah. Just in the last 2 years, MALDEF has successfully challenged the denial of federal COVID relief tax payments to mixed-status married couples with dependents in this country. Now that litigation is ongoing because while Congress, in response, did make changes to restore the rights of mixed-status families to COVID relief, they left out thousands of families across the country who had a child whose age was 16 or 17 in the intervening 9 months. The time between when the unlawful legislation was enacted and when it was repaired. In the last 2 years, MALDEF has filed the first litigation to enforce the Illinois Tenant Protection Act in response to a landlord who reported a tenant to immigration authorities because of his concerns about the habitability of his own property. MALDEF's victories, this is a participatory event. That's right. So, MALDEF's victories throughout the decades have immeasurably benefited Latino community working to secure the right to a meaningful vote, to equal educational opportunity, to non-discriminatory workplaces, and fairness and justice in every endeavor across the country. This includes MALDEF's landmark 1982 Supreme Court victory in Plyler versus Doe. Plyler versus Doe guarantees the right to a public school education, kindergarten to 12th grade, for all children, regardless of immigration status. That victory has been the foundation for current and hopefully successful efforts to provide a pathway to citizenship, not just for the dreamers, but for millions of others. Together, we are obliged to create a better quality of life for Latinos throughout the nation. So I am super excited that tonight we honor 3 individuals who have immeasurably contributed and continue to contribute to our communities. We are united by our commitment to principles that include equality and fairness and justice for all. So I have the pleasure of introducing our first honoree for this evening, Karen Narasaki, the recipient of MALDEF's Lifetime Achievement Excellence in Community Service Award. For those of you who may not be familiar with her work, Karen Narasaki is a national authority on voting rights and redistricting, census, media diversity, immigration, and race relations. She is currently a consultant to the Census Equity Initiative and to Fair Representation in Redistricting. From 2014 to 2019, she served as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, where she helped lead a landmark report on U.S. trust responsibility to Native Americans, as well as reports on public school funding, immigrant rights, hate crimes, the school-to-prison pipeline, and voting rights. For 2 decades prior to that, she's been busy. For 2 decades prior to that, she was president and executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, where she helped to lead successful efforts to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, defend federal affirmative action programs, expand federal hate crimes laws, reduce the undercount of people of color in the decennial census, increase people of color on television, and defend family immigration. Yeah. Ms. Narasaki was vice chair of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, chair of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, as well as the Asian Pacific American Media Coalition, and was a board member for Common Cause, Independent Sector, the National Immigration Law Center, the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, and the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. She is a graduate of Yale College and the UCLA School of Law. She has won countless awards, including the American Bar Association's Spirit of Excellence Award. So with great pleasure, let's take a look at the video profile MALDEF has created for Karen Narasaki.
You know, I think Karen is going to have a very broad legacy as an Asian American civil and human rights activist. I think through her work and through the work of many others, Karen has helped establish a pan-Asian civil and human rights culture that was not part of Washington prior to her coming on board. Karen really helped lead the charge on many fights that helped establish the strength of the Asian American community as a broader community. I mean, obviously there are groups like the Japanese American Citizens League or the Organization of Chinese Americans, but when Karen also helped forge Asian Americans Advancing Justice, she gave voice to this broader Pan-Asian civil rights community, and I think she will get a great deal of credit for helping to put the Asian American community into the debate on civil and human rights going forward.
Her greatest achievement is for the general population to see and to understand the Asian American community. She brought together the various sort of regional Asian American communities, Advancing Justice in Los Angeles and Chicago and Detroit and San Francisco, and she created a coalition that aligned so that the Asian American community could speak with one voice. And to me, that's the greatest accomplishment that she has made to the civil rights movement. If you look to the civil rights movement, we all have our spokespeople, our leaders. Karen was one of the first national civil rights leaders to speak on behalf of Asian Americans. And to me, that's the greatest contribution. You know, the cliche, I see you. She made America see the Asian community.
Karen's accomplishments have been many, from helping to pass federal legislation with respect to voting rights, to working on immigration reform, to being part of lawsuits that have helped to make the United States better. But part of that is just the relationships that she's built over the years. It's getting the small things done. It's working on things such as the census, which is obviously critical to all of us in the United States, but sometimes gets forgotten in the years between 2000 and 2010, or 2010 and 2020. She makes sure that she not only has the vision, but has the operational details to back that up.
You know, I think as I got to know her, as I got to see her work on the commission as a commissioner, I think never far from her background was the injustice her family had suffered during the internment of the Japanese Americans in World War II. And so I think that from that experience, it led her to be an advocate for people who were underrepresented or had no voice. And she was a fierce fighter on a number of initiatives and reports that we worked on. Karen is, again, a fierce advocate for people that do not have a voice. Again, I think it comes from injustice her family suffered, and I think she wanted to ensure that never happened again to any other community.
Karen's legacy is as a visionary. Certainly when she first got involved with AHAC, Asian Americans were a footnote, an asterisk. This was in the early 90s, and she has really created visibility for the community and put the community on the map and made people understand the issues. But then how these issues are intertwined with all of us, with respect to Latino issues, with respect to African American issues. They're really the same issues around racial justice, but she's really been the person that has had the vision to put that all together, help all of us see that.
Karen Narasaki is one of the brightest, most strategic, most effective civil and human rights advocates in Washington today. Over the years that I've known her, Karen has established herself as an indispensable player on every major civil and human rights issue in Washington.
That was beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, MALDEF is proud to recognize Karen Narasaki with its Lifetime Achievement Excellence in Community Service Award.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, MALDEF, for this Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Community Service. It's an enormous honor to share this recognition with tonight's incredible honorees. It has a very special meaning to me, coming from an organization with an amazing legacy of fighting for over half a century to advance the civil rights of Latinos in the United States. Whether the advances came through litigation or through legislation, they were not only important for Latinos, but for all who have faced and continue to face discrimination. Asian American Latinos have many shared experiences, as you know, and our community has benefited from the many victories MALDEF has won on behalf of immigrants and their children, on immigrant rights, on education, on employment, and on the right to vote. I personally have been so very fortunate that in my 30 years in Washington, D.C., the amazing leadership and incredibly dedicated staff of MALDEF have so generously shared with me their expertise and their wisdom as I first helped to build MALDEF's Asian American counterpart, the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, and then went on to serve on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Asian Americans were pretty new to DC as a civil rights litigating force, and I would often explain what we did by just saying we're the Asian American version of MALDEF. And then people would immediately get it. I had the opportunity to learn from the best, beginning with the legendary Antonia Hernandez and now with Tom Sines. I don't need to tell all of you here how critically needed MALDEF is still needed today. Last year, MALDEF litigators helped to save the United States from having a failed census and prevented a corrupt White House from falsifying the apportionment of congressional seats. This year, as it has had to do in every decade, it is already battling Texas map drawers, seeking to disempower Latino and other voters of color from having a voice in state and local policies and programs that are important to the health and well-being of their families and their communities. Our nation, as you know, is at a perilous crossroads. A frightening number of elected officials are stoking the fires of white supremacy, white nationalism, xenophobia, and homophobia as an excuse to rig elections and racially gerrymander districts in order to hold on to power rather than legitimately compete for the votes of our growing communities of color. At a time when the political polarization is so great that our country can't even come together over the simple sacrifice of wearing masks to protect ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities, it seems hopeless to some that we can come together to deliver the revolutionary promise of equity and equality embedded in the Declaration of Independence. Yet, we are a country where when we stand together, we have repeatedly made progress against all odds, expanding the right to vote, expanding the right to public education, expanding the right to work, and expanding the right to marry. In a world of disinformation and inequality, MALDEF stands as a beacon for the truth and as a bulwark for justice. It needs all of us to continue to stand with it and provide our support and partnership. As Dolores Huerta has said, every moment is an organizing opportunity. Every person is a potential activist. And every minute is a chance to change the world. And I look forward to continue to work with MALDEF to do just that. Thank you.
Mil gracias, Karen. That was so beautiful. And thank you for your dedication to advancing justice in our country. I have a presentation. I have the pleasure of introducing MALDEF's Washington, D.C. Regional Counsel, Andrea Centino.
Thank you, Raul. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. Over the last 2 years, we have all faced a great deal of adversity, loss, and sacrifice. During these unprecedented times, each of our staff has navigated the challenges of the pandemic for their own families, but they have also found comfort and purpose in the work that we are doing on behalf of the Latino community. Like many of you, we quickly adjusted to working remotely, but we continued our important work in policy and in litigation, challenging the policies coming from the Trump administration at the end of their era, and responding quickly to the urgent needs of our community in the pandemic. As the pandemic continues, our staff has continued to work on the most pressing issues that face Latinos in the U.S. today. For instance, in the area of voting rights. MALDEF has worked with our civil rights partners on the introduction of the bipartisan John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which you've already heard tonight. This key legislation restores the Voting Rights Act to its full protections. And it's a critical bill because we all know how determined states and localities can be to deny the Latino community our fair representation and access to the ballot. MALDEF testified in front of Congress, we lobbied on the Hill, in the White House, published reports, worked with academics, and have been working with our civil rights partners to build public pressure to force congressional action. The DC office has also continued to push the White House to increase the number of Latino judges in the federal bench. And we celebrate those successes with the confirmation of Judges Gustavo Gelpi and Mirna Perez to the U.S. Circuit Courts. But there remains considerable room for improvement from the Biden administration on this front, and MALDEF will continue to push for greater Latino representation in the federal judiciary. Our office also continues to be active in fighting in the courts to ensure that DACA holders are not discriminated against when seeking employment. And during the redistricting cycle, we've been working with partners on the ground across the Southeast region to engage in state and local redistricting efforts and to identify opportunities to increase Latino representation. Amidst difficulties we all face during the global crisis, I'm deeply honored to be leading our DC office in these critical efforts, and to work with such a dedicated, passionate, and talented team. I recently became a new parent. And as I've stepped away to care for my newborn, I did so knowing that the MALDEF family would support me on this new personal journey. I'd like to take this moment to thank Tom and all of my colleagues for everything that you have done to continue the DC office's important work and to allow me this special time with my son. None of this work is possible without the generous support of everyone here tonight and of many others. The challenges facing our community are ever increasing, but I assure you that MALDEF, and specifically the DC office, is ready to meet this moment. I hope that we can count on your continued generosity, and together we can advance civil rights for all Latinos in the U.S. Thank you very much.
Isn't Andrea terrific? We miss her a lot, but we know that there's a future Maldefian in her household, and that she's making sure that he gets the mission, the vision, the lingo, all down pat. But we look forward to her return in 2022. So I just want to thank you all for your return in 2021. As you heard earlier, this is our first in-person gala since April 2019 here in Washington, D.C. You all know why that is. Of course, this is a little smaller group than we've generally had here in D.C., but we're very pleased to have all the diehard MALDEF supporters in the room. Diehard and vaccinated MALDEF supporters in the room. Raul gave a rendition of some of the highlights of our most recent 2 years, as well as our history. It has been my great honor for the last 12 years to lead this extraordinary organization. And it is an important and ongoing challenge to make sure we have the resources to do the work that we need to do increasingly in other parts of the country. We have now delayed it because of the pandemic, but it has been approved, and we are moving forward with opening a new MALDEF regional office within the next several months in Seattle, Washington, to Raul also told you about our new program area beyond the areas of education, employment, immigrant rights, and voting rights. We are now focusing on open and obvious bias and racism, where it rears its ugly orange head in whatever area of endeavor across the country. We'll keep it going, but thank you all, and I'll talk to you a little more later.
It is with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce MALDEF's second honoree this evening, Luis Ubiñas. And just on a personal note, I mentioned that MALDEF everyone seems, very colegial y como una familia here. And I just found out Mr. Ubiñas and I we graduated together in college. So somehow we missed each other back then, but it's nice to see you and nice to meet you and your son. Luis Ubiñas has had an incredible career, spanning business, government, and the nonprofit sector. Luis served as president of the Ford Foundation from 2008 through 2013. This foundation, the Ford Foundation, is the second largest in the United States with an endowment of over $15 billion. While at the Ford Foundation, he led a broad-based restructuring of the organization, including tactical resetting of its strategies and operating programs, and reinvestment of over 80% of the endowment. Luis also served as senior partner at McKinsey & Company and as an Obama-era appointee to both the Export-Import Bank and the International Trade Commission. During the 2020 presidential campaign, Luis co-chaired the Biden Economic Policy Committee. Luis is currently chair of the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation. He stepped down last fall as president of the Board of Trustees of the Pan American Development Foundation, which invests over $95 million per year in development projects in Central and South America and the Caribbean. He actually led that foundation as it expanded its work in Puerto Rico, Mexico, and Central America. Luis also serves on several multilateral governmental and nonprofit boards and advisory committee, including the Advisory Board of the United Nations Fund for International Partnerships and the New York Public Library, where he serves as chair of the Finance Committee and on the Executive Committee. Luis is a graduate of Harvard College, magna cum laude in government. With a certificate in Latin American Studies, he was named a Truman Scholar. He's also a graduate of Harvard Business School with highest honors, a Baker Scholar. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Not too shabby, right? Luis and his wife, Deborah Tolman, the feminist scholar, have two sons, actually, Max, who is here, and Ben. So let's take a look now at the video MALDEF produced for Luis Ubiñas.
Luis Ubiñas is what I call scary smart, and you could tell that upon meeting him immediately. He was definitely the smartest kid that I met at Harvard, and I'd say he's probably the smartest person I've ever met. I think the thing that has driven Luis throughout his life has been his commitment to his family and his community. Luis lost both of his parents as a young man, and he had to take charge of his younger siblings as well as his own family and his own children. And he has been fanatically committed to taking care of his family and fanatically committed to taking care of his community his entire life. I don't think I've ever seen anyone as devoted to his family and his community as Luis Ubiñas.
So my first impression of Luis, which I'm sure is the impression that everybody has, right? Somebody who's brilliant, polished, great people person, I would say. But he is so much more than that. I think the fundamental humanity that is Luis sometimes gets lost when you first see him, right? Because he is so polished, so driven, that you don't realize what an incredible people person he is. What drives him, which is his family ultimately, and his love of community. And so, getting to know Luis is getting to know an amazing person because he is truly real, so a very real and genuine person.
I first met Luis in 2008, right before he took over the Ford Foundation. Met him in a downtown restaurant in San Francisco. He was still working at McKinsey. I was excited to meet a fellow Puerto Rican who had now become the head of the Ford Foundation. A little bit nervous. I knew I would meet a man with a formidable intelligence and charisma. That's what McKinsey partners are known for. What I didn't know was that Luis would also bring the soul of a social justice warrior. Someone who would get it in his bones, in his DNA, what the important work of the Ford Foundation could mean. The idea that we can really make a difference, that we can make bold changes in society, that we can double down on helping those communities that most needed the help from institutions like the Ford Foundation all across the globe. After a lunch, a kinetic pace, some good conversation, some belly laughter, some sharing of personal stories, I knew that Luis would be a friend. And that more importantly, he would be a great leader for an institution that would really step up to the plate at a critical time in our history and make a real difference for the least among us all across the world.
Luis has broken down so many barriers in his life and has blazed a trail for other folks to follow as being the first Latino president of the Ford Foundation, as a business leader, as a community leader, as a father, as a husband, as a plain old wonderful human being. Luis Ubiñas simply has set a model for other people to emulate.
What drives Luis is a love of family and a love for community. You know that Luis has reached the highest pinnacle in philanthropy. You can't get any higher than being the president of the Ford Foundation, and what he's doing now in terms of being an investor and always thinking about community front and center. That no matter where you are, no matter sort of what road you take, that community has to be at the center of what you do, because it is fundamentally who you are, and not forgetting who you are. That is so important, and Luis has never forgotten where he's come from. Luis has never forgotten his people. Luis is always thinking about whatever he does, about how can I help my community, how can I help my people, and that is why he is beloved, and that's why he very much is getting this award tonight.
Luis's accomplishments are off the charts, from his academic accomplishments at Harvard Business School, to his accomplishments in the business world at McKinsey, to being the president of the Ford Foundation, to his many contributions to the community. Luis Ubiñas has quite simply done it all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Luis Ubiñas.
So the problem with that is now you all know too much about me. You know, I like being quietly in the back of the room. It's ever harder to do. But before I do anything else, let me just thank Tom and MALDEF for this award. Tom, could you just stand up so we can thank you? You know, over the years, I've met almost every civil rights leader. A few of them stand out as spectacular, and Tom's one of them. And I just want to personally thank you for what you do for our community. So that's the last I'm speaking of myself in this entire 3 minutes, so that's a good thing. What I want to do is very briefly speak about MALDEF. All of you who know me know that you're about to get a tougher message than you want to have here at a dinner, but that's how it is. I want to talk about why its work and your support for its work is so critically important, in some ways more important than ever. Many of the people in this room are Latino or Latina. I want you to ask yourselves, where would we be as individuals and as a community without the struggle to gain equal rights, without the work of MALDEF? I want to start with some history, because a lot of us don't know our history well. You know, we all know about Loving versus Virginia. There's even been a movie about it. It was critical and important and seminal. But how many of us have ever heard about Perez v. Sharp? It's the case that allowed Latinos and Latinas to marry outside our ethnicity in California. No one's heard of it. It's just assumed we didn't have that struggle. We've all heard about Brown v. Board of Education, but how many of us have heard about the Mendez case? The Mendez case. Some of you. You know, that's the case which allowed American children of Mexican descent. Now, these are American children of Mexican heritage to attend integrated schools as opposed to what were then called Mexican schools, again in California. You know, these aren't little things. These are cases, our freedom to marry, our freedom to be educated, and just some examples of countless other cases just like them that allow us to be here today. Just stop and think about that. You know, I tell my kids, my son is here, thank you for coming. But I tell my kids, just remember, We're not here by accident. Just remember, you get to go to that school because someone forced them to take us. Just remember, I'm able to marry your mother because someone forced that right to happen. None of this came for free, and none of it came easily. But this work is barely done, because equality remains a distant dream in our community, and sometimes it's hard to forget. Sometimes it's hard to remember when you're in a great place like this, when it feels to you like you have equal opportunity, equal access. But that's not what the bulk of our community enjoys every day, enjoys right now. I'm going to briefly take some cultural examples rather than legal ones for just a moment. It's because we are literally invisible in the media, the most underrepresented group in the country. 26%, more than 1 out of every 4 young men and women in this country are my son's age or younger, 25, 26 or younger. Ask yourself how many of the 25-year-olds you see on TV are Latino. Hardly any. We're invisible in corporate boardrooms, and let me tell you, I'm in a lot of corporate boardrooms. We are by far, in fact, the most underrepresented group in those boardrooms. We're underrepresented. And by the way, these are places where decisions are made. We're underrepresented by 85%. 85%. That approximates 0. Even right across the street at the White House, and please don't be angry about this, and they won't make fun of you later. Even right across the street at the White House, and by the way, this is a Democratic White House, one we fought to get elected. Even right across the street at the White House, we, of course, are the most underrepresented group in this country. We're underrepresented by half. Half. We're not a little underrepresented. We're underrepresented by half. So we have to understand that the work MALDEF does to make us equal under the law, so that someday we might be equal in this culture, is far from done. Because whether it's intentional cruelty, imagine that, in Georgia immigration centers, or exclusionary redistricting maps in Texas and in Illinois, vast amounts are left to be done. And until that legal work is done, we have slim hope of finding the cultural equality that must be ours. So why is this work important? Because if we someday don't want to be half of what we should be at the White House, or a 1/7 of what we should be in corporate boardrooms, or barely visible on television, we have to begin to get equality under the law. That is the work of MALDEF. That is the work Tom leads. And that's why our collective support of MALDEF has never been more important. Because we simply cannot live in a country where 25%, 26% of the next generation is Latino or Latina. And please never use the phrase Latinx in my presence. If you have to use something, at least use Latin, which is the normal thing. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, that's why our collective support for MALDEF has never been important. That's why I want to thank you all for being here. And that's why things like that fundraising drive that Tom put up matter so much. Tom, if they fall short, I'll make up the difference. But all kidding aside, But all kidding aside, we have to remember our history in order to create the future we must create for the kids who are 0, for the kids who are 25, for the kids who are coming behind us. You heard some of my friends talking about what we have to do. We have no choice. We have no choice. Because whether you're the CEO of Bank of America, who I've talked to about these issues, or you're one of us, the future of this country requires that the Latin community, the Latinos and Latinas of all ages, be treated equally under the law so that we can participate equally in the culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis, for your tireless efforts to ensure equality and justice for the Latino community, and in all that you've done and continue to do. Such a joy to see these Latinx achievers. So wonderful, so wonderful. All right. Before we present our next honoree, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our GALA chair, Becky Pringle, President of the National Education Foundation, to speak.
Good evening. It is so wonderful, right? It is to be here together in person. I have to begin by thanking our good friend Tom for partnering with the NEA on our racial justice work. Whenever we called on you, you were right there to share your wisdom and your expertise with our members and continuously challenge us, right? To always do better. So yes, let's give it up again for Tom. And congratulations, Karen and Luis. My goodness, it is such an honor to be here together with such greatness. Give it up, please, again for Karen and for Luis. As the president of the largest labor union in this country, I have the honor, on behalf of NEA's 3 million members, most of whom are here tonight, let's hear it, NEA, to join you in the presentation of the MALDEF Lifetime Achievement Excellence in Community Service Award to the immediate past president, President Emeritus. Yeah, bro, I know, right? It's printed in the program, yes. Lily Eskelsen Garcia. There is no one more passionate, tenacious, or determined about demanding the resources that educators need and that students deserve to live into their brilliance. If women want any more rights than what they've got, why don't they just take them and not be talking about it? That's what our Lily did. Now, she did talk a lot too, though, but during her tenure, she reflected those powerful words by Sojourner Truth. As the first Latina NEA president, she planted, yeah, I know, give it up, She planted the seeds of NEA's ongoing work with MALDEF to fight anti-immigration efforts. And she led by example. You see, she donated to United We Dream the proceeds from her poignant and beautiful book, Rabble Rousers, which her husband, Alberto, I know, right? Illustrated. Yeah, give it up for Alberto, yeah. She promoted the inclusion of more Latino leaders, which paved the way for our NEA's current work with the Biden administration to nominate more powerful Latino and Latina leaders throughout the administration, not where we should be, right? We just heard that from Luis. absolutely not where we need to be. But we'll continue to push for nominations like the unapologetic voting rights lawyer, Myrna Perez. Yeah, we're going to continue to push and work for her. Lily did all of that because she never forgot those sixth graders she taught with joy and high expectations. She always remembered the homeless children who depended on her for hope. And as a teacher of the year, she worked unceasingly to ensure that all educators are prepared to do what they must. That when we say every student, we mean every student. Everyone, every single one has the access and opportunity to live into their brilliance. For her courageous and compassionate leadership that centered NEA's work on racial and social justice, which is education justice. Someone who led with integrity, advocated unabashedly, and inspired with action. I am proud to be here this evening with my many colleagues as MALDEF presents to my sister, my friend, our Lily Eskelsen Garcia, this prestigious award, because we know that her fight is not over. She will always be the NEA. She will always speak up for all of our students. She will always make us proud, and she will always demand that each and every one of us is worthy of our students. Please give it up for our Lily Eskelsen Garcia.
Lily has always been driven by trying to make life better for others. As she realized that her passion kind of intersected with her talents and began to lean toward education, she knew that she could make a difference in the lives of students. And so it always drove her, regardless of whether she was serving them lunch as the lunch lady, or after she ultimately became a teacher, making sure that her students, all of them, had exactly what they needed, when they needed it, so they could live into their brilliance.
I think the most important thing I've learned from Lily Eskelsen Garcia is the ability to have fun and have a sense of humor, and that we need to be joyful in this work, even in the face of unprecedented attack on working people, in the face of the worst racial and economic inequality, in the face of total injustice towards the immigrant community in this nation. Lily brings an incredible balance to her leadership, where she remains very human and connected as a grandmother, as a wife, but also a fierce, powerful leader for the 3 million member National Education Association.
NEA is a very activist union supporting public education, but I really do believe that Lily took it to the next level. She, I believe, instituted programs which empowered her members and national education members across the country. She was out front and took the lead on the teachers' actions that took place last year and 2 years ago, as far as the strikes and the job actions that took place across the country in some states where you never would have believed she would have been able to pull it off. And it just wasn't her, but it was her leading the way with her leadership within those states. She brings people together. She talks with people. She's very personable. And even if she's in a large room, I've noticed that there may be 1,000 people in the room when she's speaking, but it's like she's talking to the individual one-on-one. And that's a gift. That's a gift that she has. And you know that she would never ask you to do anything that she wasn't willing to do herself. And I think that's a part of her life. I mean, how she grew up and what she has been able to do in moving into the highest position of the National Education Association, which is a big deal.
Lily understands, I think at the core of Lily is an absolute total commitment to doing right by our children, ensuring a quality public education, and also doing right by the professionals that provide the education and work in the educational environment on behalf of children. I think that's at the core of Lily Eskelsen. She is all about the kids and all about the teachers.
Lily's legacy is going to be through every child that is currently in school, that was in school, and that will be in school. This isn't soft impact. You have to understand the magnitude is even bigger when you have 3 million members that you're leading, and more importantly, you're affecting millions and millions and millions of students, their parents, their family members, their community members. All of it is dependent on her legacy. So I believe that her legacy is going forward when a kid becomes a professional, when a kid solves any kind of medical issues, when a kid creates new technology, when a kid leads a grassroots movement, when someone runs for office. Those are all her legacies.
Lily has always been a very focused and determined leader, one who has been very, very clear about her vision. And what I've learned from Lily is that when you articulate a clear and compelling vision, and then you roll up your sleeves and you make it so, that people will not only follow you, they will join you in a movement, because that's what we're in the middle of right now. We are in the middle of a movement to ensure that not one, not some, but every single student has what they need and deserve so that they can be happy, so they can be healthy, so they can thrive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome and congratulations to Lily Eskelsen Garcia, Lifetime Achievement, Excellence in Community Service.
Thank you. Oh my Lord. I told Becky she's going to write my obituary. And yes, I did read the invitation and it said business attire, but I look so good in this dress. I bought it before the pandemic. I am going to wear this dress. I do not know how many of you might understand what this award means to me, because I am not a humble person. I am a teacher. When I hear a teacher say, oh, I'm not very important, I'm just a teacher, that conversation will not end well, because they are going to hear me explain to them, if you don't understand the power that you have for good or bad, malo o bueno, then you don't belong in this profession. You need to understand that you have the future in your hands. And so I had this strange feeling when I heard about this award, because humilde de corazón is not my normal state. I don't have a humble heart, but this recognition made me take a deep breath. And of course, when we got the news, we popped the Mexican champagne. In Spanish, it's pronounced tequila, okay? And I had to explain to my family in Juarez, because after I retired, we moved to El Paso, Juarez. It's one community. And I had to explain why I got to go to Washington, D.C., and I had to explain how to pronounce MALDEF and what that was, and I especially had to explain it to one of America's newest Mexican Americans, my husband, Alberto Garcia. After 7 long years, his citizenship papers came in when? On Cinco de Mayo, which was the perfect combination of American bureaucracy and a Mexican borrachera. You know, so we all got together, we had a great cultural exchange. It was beautiful. But I told him about the work of MALDEF. And I reminded him, I said, America can be a place of kindness and generosity and charity. And MALDEF is none of those things. The work of MALDEF is not a kind act of charity. It is a damn act of fierce and fearless justice. We don't ask, we demand. MALDEF attacks injustice, racism, prejudice, not by throwing an individual a lifeline, but by changing the law, changing policies, the laws and policies that advantage or disadvantage entire communities in things as basic as school funding, as housing, as who gets to vote. And when it's an act of justice, it's an act of love. And I will tell you that to a teacher like myself, love is not a soft, frilly thing. Love is something we will fight for. We fight for what we love. And it's love that brought you into this room here tonight. I love my family. I love my students and my colleagues and my crazy union, the mighty National Education Association. And I had more than one of you sitting on the other side of the room who went, who invited these people? Because we are about joy. And we take our work very, very seriously. Tom, I want to tell you, I love MALDEF. I love you for not dreaming any small dreams. I love you for never being humble, for challenging the greatest powers of prejudice and privilege imaginable, and standing in the breach, an unmovable force for justice. Justice in the country that I love. And I told mi querido Alberto, I said, I love my country, but I will never love who we are as much as I love who we must become. Y por eso, gracias mi familia, mis hermanos y hermanas, gracias desde mi humilde corazón. Thank you from the bottom of my humble heart.
I think some of your fan club has a special presentation. Thank you, Lily, for your dedication to empowering the Latino community in all areas of education. I would like to welcome back to the stage MALDEF President and General Counsel Thomas Saenz.
What an extraordinary evening. Becky, thank you for calling it greatness. I think that it was an evening of eloquent greatness from all of our honorees, as well as our other speakers tonight. And I want to thank you all for joining us in this extraordinary reunion after over 2 years of our supporters, collaborators, and partners in Washington, D.C. I want to begin by thanking Raul Reyes, our extraordinary MC, who agreed to do this very recently out of his understanding and appreciation of the incredible mission and history of this organization. So Raul, I salute you, and I even forgive you for being from Harvard. Yes, two from the same class. I don't know, too many Harvard on the program tonight. Thank you, Karen, my fellow Yaley, for helping to balance things out. But thank you, Raul. We really appreciate your commitment. I want to thank our MALDEF board members, most of whom are not here, but you heard from one earlier, the incomparable Emilio Gonzalez, who, despite only hearing tonight that he had to speak, spoke so eloquently and on point. So thank you, Emilio. He represents a board from across the country who support us in every endeavor through their championing of the cause, through their financial support, through their leadership in strategizing what to do next. I want to certainly recognize one of our former board chairs who's here tonight, a very special board chair to me because she was chair when I became president and general counsel 12 years ago, and that's Patricia Madrid, the former Attorney General of the state of New Mexico. Thank you. Thank you, Patsy, for being here. Of course, putting together an event like this, especially in these times, is never easy. Hotels are different, as those of us who have traveled a bit during the later months of the pandemic understand. So I do want to recognize my staff who put together this extraordinary event, Gina Montoya, Emi Borrayo, Jose Delgado, and that whole team. And I want to recognize another vice president of MALDEF who's here tonight, our vice president of communications, and her team, Sandra Hernandez and Julie Gallego, who have been doing extraordinary work in getting the issues out there, understood by the most important media outlets in the country in a constantly evolving media landscape. I want to, again, thank our extraordinary honorees, and I want to thank them not just for what you saw on the screen, what you heard in their words tonight, but for their commitment through difficult times and even more difficult times to the cause that we all work together to achieve, which is making this country truer to the words in its founding documents than it has ever been. They are barrier breakers. They have been pioneers, and that's an extraordinary thing. Nonetheless, I look forward to the time when, and I've been here for 12 years, so it better be soon. I look forward to the time that we can honor those who were the second, the third, the fourth of whatever, but we're still in an age of thanking and recognizing the firsts. The first Latino president of the Ford Foundation, the first Latina president of the extraordinary NEA, the first 20-year leader of the leading Asian American civil rights organization. I'm looking forward to the seconds, the thirds, the fourths, so let's get moving. But let me thank again the extraordinary Karen Narasaki, Luis Ubiñas, and Lily Eskelsen Garcia. Please, on behalf of all of us speaking for so many, many more tables and cities and schools and masses of folks beyond this room, thank you for all that you've done. You know, they've been so eloquent, I feel the need to say very little, but you know, I'm a lawyer, so yeah, good luck with that. Since at least 1981, this time of the decade has been a time of extraordinary opportunity for the Latino community. After each census, 80, 90, 2000, 2010, 2020, we've seen the incredible growth and expansion across the country of our Latino community. And that has in turn created opportunities to seek greater representation for our community in the halls of Congress, in the halls of state legislatures, but also, of course, on school boards, special districts, city councils, county boards across the country. And that's certainly true for 2021. And I want to pause for a moment and recognize that that continued streak since 1981 was not a foregone conclusion. You've already heard reference previously the extraordinary attempted manipulation, the tainting of our United States Census, all targeted at our community. We saw the attempt last minute to add a citizenship question. We later learned what we all suspected through the hard drive of a deceased Republican Party consultant, that that question was entirely designed to decrease the participation of Latino families in the US Census. And when that didn't work, through the great efforts of civil rights organizations, including, I'm proud to say, MALDEF across the country, we had a president who sought to create an independent database of citizens in order to permit his allies to leave non-citizens, millions and millions of folks across the country, leave them out of the count for redistricting. And when that wasn't enough, toward the end of his tenure, that president sought to create a database that excluded the undocumented from the state population count used to reapportion, to reallot the 435 seats in the House of Representatives. Now, the census always had a political element to it. But throughout our history, it had been viewed, since its inclusion in our Constitution, as an essential and nonpartisan element of governance in this country. But what we saw from the most anti-Latino administration in our country's history was an attempt to manipulate that census with the specific goal of undercounting us. But despite that taint, that manipulation, Latino families were counted. They stepped forward at great perceived risk to them or their family members to ensure that they would play a part in the next 10 years of our country's history and development. And so we saw that an extraordinary 51% of our nation's total population growth in the last decade was Latino. A community that is now 19% of the population accounted for 51% of the growth of the entire nation's population. Now that presents the opportunity that we now seek to ensure is reality through the redistricting process. But you have already heard that as in every decade since 1981, that tremendous time of opportunity is also a time of struggle. Because it is regrettably still true that no one in power, regardless of party, easily hands over authority to someone new. We're not new, but we're perceived that way. So, as you've already heard, we are already in court against two states, Illinois and Texas. Two states very different politically, one with lines adopted by a democratically controlled legislature, the other by a Republican-dominated state legislature. And yet in both cases, Illinois and Texas, what we saw was a failure to recognize the growth of the Latino community in both of those states. But not just a failure, an attempt to prevent that growth from being recognized in the future composition of legislative bodies in both states. So tomorrow, a team of lawyers in Chicago from MALDEF will go to court for the final hearing in the Illinois case to argue that there is no justification for a state that but for the Latino community would have lost population, to dismantle, as they did, Latino majority districts to defend white Democratic incumbents, that failed to create in the broader Chicagoland area additional districts to represent that growing Latino community. And in a development in the Texas case today, as you all are probably aware, the Department of Justice joined litigation challenging specifically discrimination against the Latino community in the Texas legislature's drawing of its congressional lines. MALDEF was the first to file its case in Texas. The Department of Justice will be consolidated together with many other parties in what must be seen as the strongest case of discrimination in redistricting in that state, despite its less than stellar record referenced earlier by Raul. Not only do we face this struggle to see that redistricting results in a truer representation of our national community, we are convening tonight, December 6th, 11 months from the most extraordinary threat to our democracy in recent memory. On January 6th, as you all know, 11 months ago, an extraordinary attempt at insurrection occurred just a few blocks from here at our nation's capital. We know in this room and can acknowledge that so much of what is behind that insurrection and the continued threats to our democracy that emanate from it, so much of what is behind that is a fear of those in this room and our families and extended families beyond. It is no simple coincidence that the president who fomented that insurrection began his campaign for president in June of 2015 with a slander against all Mexican immigrants, a slander against all Latinos, because he doesn't differentiate. And as so many of his followers, he doesn't recognize that there's a difference within us. That threat to democracy didn't dissipate when the House and Senate came together later in the evening of January 6th, the late evening, to ensure that our electoral college process would be completed. The threat continues in the unreasoned opposition to public health measures in our pandemic. It continues in the attempts to manipulate the process of voting in states across the country. It continues in the loud opposition to those who would seek to ensure equality for all. This threat to democracy has its roots, again, in fear and opposition to our community, the Latino community. And it began with a vacuum that still exists. when Donald Trump slandered Mexican immigrants and then doubled down a year later by accusing a Mexican-American federal judge of bias against him simply because he is Mexican-American, and continued through executive orders, tweets, policies throughout his administration to target the Latino community and Latino immigrants. It began with his ability to appeal to folks who didn't understand or know the Latino community, the vacuum. That vacuum exists because of what Luis explained in his remarks, the extraordinary and extreme underrepresentation and exclusion of the Latino community from so many corridors of power across the country. Latinos have now been the largest racial minority group in the country for 18 years. The census recognized in 2003 that Latinos were now the largest minority group in the country. At 19%, according to the 2020 census, we are now 5 percentage points larger than any other minority community. And yet, our level of exclusion dwarfs all others, as Luis explained. A few more wrinkles on that. It's not just that our level of underrepresentation in the media has always been the largest, comparison of our percentage in the population to our percentage represented in media. That has always been the largest gap. But today, in figures I saw recently, we're actually not just the largest gap. We have the lowest absolute representation, 4th, behind whites, behind blacks, behind Asian Americans. So we're second largest after whites in the country's population, but literally 4th when it comes to representation in media, in absolute numbers. My terrific colleague Andrea talked about our efforts on behalf of judicial appointments. Those efforts were necessary not just because we appreciate and understand the importance of representation in the federal judiciary, but because for too many months of this first year in office, the Biden administration, despite extraordinary diversity of professional background, of race in its judicial nominees, for too long in this year, Latinos were 4th in our representation among those nominated to lifetime positions on the federal judiciary by the Biden administration, 4th. There were more whites, there were more blacks, there were more Asian Americans. Now, we recently moved to 3rd, but we are not so firmly in 3rd that that might not change. In my own state of California, a state that you all know now, is not just a state with a 40% Latino population, but is a state known for its progressive agenda, its progressive policy. No offense to you East Coasters who may still have some of that. But I'll give you a little ammunition. In my own home state of California, we have 7 members of our California Supreme Court. 7. There are 2 white justices, 2 black justices, 2 Asian American justices, and 1 Latino. And in the history of my state, there's never been more than 1 Latino ever on the California Supreme Court. In my home state of California, we have a set of constitutional, statewide elected officials, governor, lieutenant governor, etc. Today, Latinos are 4th in representation among those holding those statewide elected positions. There are more whites, there are more blacks, there are more Asian Americans. Now, in the Latino community, we have a demonstrated history of respect for diversity and inclusion, of partnership with other communities. I tell folks often that we were modeled on the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund's Director Council made it possible by going to the Ford administration on our behalf for MALDEF to open its doors. But we can no longer accept being fourth. We can no longer accept having the greatest exclusion from corporate boards, from the entertainment media, from leadership in too many different arenas across the country. Now, 1981, as I said, was the first opportunity decade for us through redistricting. Powerful change, seeing not just 1, 2 across the country, but more Latinos and Latinas elected to Congress, legislatures, and local boards. I was a young man in high school in 1981. And I remember then that they called us in the Latino community the sleeping giant. Didn't make sense then, doesn't make sense now, because we're not asleep. I don't see any of you asleep, well, maybe from my remarks, but we're not asleep. We're not unconscious to what's going on. We're aware. If anybody's asleep, it's those who are at the helm in putting us in these positions of exclusion and non-representation. If they would open their eyes, they would see who it is standing above their hospital bed, taking care of their grandparents and their parents. It's Latinos. If they open their eyes, they would see who's standing above the beds, the cribs of their children, taking care of them. It's Latinos. If they opened their eyes from their sleep and saw who's standing over their flower beds and recognized them, caring for their gardens, it's Latinos. But more than that, if they woke up from their sleep, they would see, standing over their child's desk in a classroom, ensuring that they understand arithmetic, is a Latino or Latina teacher. Not only that, standing over the drafting table are Latinos and Latinas carving the future of our country. And as the President and General Counsel of MALDEF, I have to say, if they opened their eyes from their sleep, they would see that standing at podiums in front of the Supreme Court, the Fifth Circuit, the Seventh Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, district courts pertinent to each of those, are Latinos and Latinas advocating not just for civil rights for Latinos, but for equality, for a true commitment to the abiding and shared values of our nation. Who's sleeping? It's not the giant. We need to wake those in power up to recognize that it's not just 81, 91, 01, 2011, 2021 that are opportunities for us. It's every year, it's every month from this day forward. We have proven ourselves through this pandemic as the largest component of essential workers, contributing while still suffering the highest infection and death rates of any community through this pandemic. Wake up, America. Time is now to provide the leadership representation to all communities, but starting with the most excluded, the Latino community. As the whole nation emerges from the slumber of social isolation and work from home, we must deliver that wake-up call, the giant who's been awake tending to your needs, demanding representation commensurate with our growing size. And I commit to you that we will see you again in 2022. I commit to you that all of the staff at MALDEF, and let me for a moment ask all of the staff at MALDEF, past or present, who are here, to please stand. All staff members of MALDEF. That's the wake-up call. We know you'll all be there with us. When you hear us calling, and you see the MALDEF symbol in the sky, you'll know we're hard at work to ensure that America wakes up to the full potential, the full and deserved commitment of our Latino community. Good night.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Thomas. The Latino community is so grateful to have you at the helm of MALDEF. And, you know, I myself am about the same age as MALDEF. And when I was a kid, there was no one, I had never met or even heard of a Latina attorney, never. So for me to be here with all of this elite group and such strong advocates and people who are representing our community's legal rights is an incredible honor, and I truly appreciate it, Thomas. So for all of you, thank you for supporting MALDEF's 2021 Washington, D.C. Gala. MALDEF is privileged to enjoy the ongoing support of so many capable and wise partners, and grateful for you, for all of you, for joining in celebration of MALDEF's first gala in DC in 2 years. And on top of the people who Thomas recognized, I did want to thank our technical gentlemen in the back who have kept this whole program running, and the videos, and also our serving staff and the staff at the Mayflower that has done an outstanding job. And on behalf of MALDEF, let's give another round of applause for each of our honorees and sponsors, our teachers, Verizon, all of you. Thank you for having me here on this very special night. From the bottom of my heart, this was a great honor for me, and I appreciate it. And we will see you next year. Gracias.